Hello, I'm Jacob, and about a month ago I decided to do something arguably stupid. Because I have decided to remake Half-Life, or at least to create some of its mechanics for my Half-Life clone game. I tackled it by dividing the core Half-Life experience into two main groups, look and feel. I believe these are the most important elements that a Half-Life-like game should have. Looks is actually rather easy. Half-Life was made on Gold Source engine in 1998. The engine was limited by the technology of the time and average player's computing power. This allows us to quite easily establish boundaries of what I can do to keep the retro look. For instance, Gold Source is capable of rendering textures up to 512 by 512 pixels in size, but the actual game uses mostly 128 pixels for large objects like walls and floors, and 64 pixels for smaller objects like crates. To achieve a similar effect in a modern engine, we simply crunch the textures down to a size that Half-Life used. Similarly, with 3D models, we can look at the poly count of comparable Half-Life model and create our model with a similar amount of polygons. But I'm not merely looking to remake Half-Life. As I said, I do want this to be a standalone game, and that comes with my own stylistic choices. For starters, I'll ignore some of the Gold Source limitations, like the color palette limit. A Gold Source texture could only have a maximum of 256 colors on it, which sometimes led to some colors appearing smudged together. There is some arguing in the community over which texture rendering style is the Half-Life style. Originally, the game only supported soft rendering, which did not allow for some of the more advanced rendering techniques, but got support for it soon after, giving us wavy water, high resolutions, and texture filtering. If your computer didn't support OpenGL or Direct3D when the game launched, you might have actually experienced Half-Life this way, but I think it's safe to assume that most Half-Life fans played the game with its default settings, which includes the filtering. For my game, I made a choice to not filter textures. I feel like texture filtering was used as a means of making the graphics look better, hiding the abysmally low resolution that developers had to work with and not actually being a part of the creative process. Of course, I might not be correct. I'm sure there's at least one designer who used the blur as a creative decision, but since I'm purposefully trying to reference late 90s FPS games with my project, I feel like it's a correct choice to work with the pixels and not despite them. Using pixel perfect rendering allows me to have much more control over the look of the game, rather than leaving it to the filtering. Speaking of controversial choices, this isn't the first time I'm making a retro-styled game. And one thing I use my style are normal maps, overlaid on top of the pixelated texture. If you don't know what a normal map is, imagine a detail texture, but in 3D. It can change the way light reacts to a texture, making it appear bumpy. This technique was utilized to great effect in Half-Life 2, especially in Ravenholm, where I fell in love with this effect after I saw it for the first time. I personally think it adds much more believability to the world, when you can see it react to the light around it. But I know not everybody shares this opinion, as I've been informed countless times by players wishing the effect wasn't present on the game's textures, and although I stand by its inclusion in the game, I did add an option for the player to disable them if they so desire. Of course, there are many more things that make an art style, but for the sake of this video's length, all we need to remember is Gold Source limitations, what we can imitate from them, and where we should deviate. You can disagree with me on the latter, but I've made my choices and I feel like they will prove themselves correct as time goes on. While look is quite obvious to define, the feel is much more esoteric and personal. We can't always properly describe how things feel to us, and some elements of a game's feel can be important to some, while ignored by others. But I figured out a few pillars of Half-Life's core gameplay, which made Half-Life stand out from other 90s shooters. First one is seamless level transitions. This one is simple enough. You just design levels in a way that keeps the level geometry the same between the two of them. The problem starts at pillar number 2, and that's saving anywhere. You can hit the save button at any point in the game, and be restored to that exact time, including the NPCs, dialogue, animations, and even keeping save data between the levels. And I have to be honest here, I have no clue how Valve did it. I tried many different things, I almost cancelled the whole project because I couldn't figure out how to save and load this amount of data. In the end, I had to heavily compromise with how the game is saved, particularly in terms of dialogue, as saving and loading would break the voice line order. Speaking of dialogue, that is the third fundamental pillar of Half-Life. NPCs, you can talk to the player, move in scripted sequences, and interact with the environment. And I'm still working on that one. I'm having some issues figuring out how to have multiple NPCs all interacting with each other and playing appropriate animations. But this whole project only makes me appreciate Half-Life more, because even with all the modern knowledge and technology, I'm still struggling to recreate something that 30 people managed to make in 1998. Nevertheless, I hope you accompany me on this journey as I try, and probably fail, to catch a lightning in a bottle and make a worthy successor to Half-Life.